Chapter 12, Demons and Monsters. Sunday, September 20, 1998, Dr. Ken Jung Chow of Tent Robotics was an hour early for his meeting with Peter Katsuyori in the middle of Tokyo's Roppongi district, inside the Tsubakiya Coffee Roppongi, having a cup of coffee. A few minutes later, Peter Katsuyori enters the coffee shop wearing his signature Sartoria Sikio's handmade suits. Standing up straight, and making a traditional bow, Dr. Ken Jung Chow initiated the first greeting, followed by a shaking of hands. Dr. Ken Jung, it's an honor to see you again. Did I keep you waiting? No, not at all. You're still 15 minutes early. I appreciate the time you have given. Please sit. Okay, so what is this important matter that you want to talk about? Mr. Katsuyori, please forgive me for meeting with you like this, but unless I think my concerns are life-threatening, I would not have taken this risk. I understand, Doctor, please continue with your concern. I was under the impression that the newly engineered virus strains were developed to find a cure for cancer. I don't know where Paul Takuma's resources came from, but the medical progress we have made is truly revolutionary because of this. Okay, that seems to be good news, but tell me about your concern. I want to know why Paul Takuma interrupted our research and asked us to strengthen the new strains of virus. I know that we've talked about this, but if Paul Takuma's intention is to release this out in the open, we will have a global pandemic. Have you addressed your concerns to Paul Takuma? Yes, I have, Dr. Ken Jung Chow answered. And what did he say to you? He has indirectly threatened my life and my entire family. Mr. Katsuyori, I have always seen you as an honorable man, and for the safety of my family, I am willing to obey. I just want to know what they intend to do with the newly developed viruses. I admire your courage, Doctor, in approaching me on this matter. You gave me so much confidence, but I'm afraid we're in the same situation. For the safety of everyone, I cannot speak any further, but all I can say is this. For the safety of your family and your own, I would simply do what Paul Takuma tells you to do and never speak of this matter to anyone. Especially to the authorities. There is a time for fighting, and there is a time for waiting. Let's just avoid the time to die for now, shall we? Peter said, receiving the doctor's humble nod. Morning for Shigeru. Wednesday, November 14, 2018, back in the warehouse, Samuel, Marcus, and Amanda were sitting on a sofa quietly thinking about their other options, while Lorena was sleeping on the corner, exhausted from weeks of mourning for Shigeru's death. Meanwhile, fueled by her curiosity and seeing a crowbar lying around, Tammy was interrupted by boredom and wanted to open wooden crates at random to see what was inside and found various forms of high-powered weapons. Gazing at the top of the stockpile, she sees an unusual medium-sized rectangular box and starts to climb with such speed that it leaves the awakened Lorena dazzled, patiently watching from a distance in secret. Having left the crowbar on the ground, Tammy instinctively snapped the wood and tore it open. "Oh wow," she exclaimed, unexpectedly shocked at her strength, and seeing through the content of the box, she saw a magnificent Japanese antique sword that came along with a certificate that mentioned the name of Honj Masamune. Considered in the 13th or 14th century as one of the greatest swordsmiths, Honj Masamune's swords were legendary and widely sought after by collectors. Throughout most of the Edo period, he represented the shogunate and was passed from one shogun to another. As stated on the certificate, it was no ordinary katana. It was a tachi. Typically longer and more curved than the katana, this sword was said to be a ceremonial emperor's blade, and with her vivid imagination, she stood up on the top of the crates and pressed her thumb up against the tsuba, handguard, while holding the scabbard with the other hand, releasing the sword, and makes a perfect kiritsuke, finishing cut. Recalling all of the drills in her kendo training, she does a 5-hit strike consecutively with the swinging of her sword above her head cutting down to eye level as her final cut. Pausing to see how sharp the blade was, it easily cut through the graphene skin of her prosthetic fingers, which was pretty impressive, considering that this material is 200 times stronger than steel and was very expensive. Spotting her sister from a distance, she took the sword back to her scabbard and jumped 20 feet to the ground with the sword, and went on to embrace her sister. "What were you doing nosing around my stuff?" Lorena asked. "Look at what I found." "Oh wow, that's a magnificent sword. Can I have it?" "If you can wield it, you can have it," Lorena agreed before drifting off to sleep. On the next day, ruminating out loud about Shigeru's death, Tammy strongly suggested taking action against the tent robotics with an idea resembling one of her Japanese manga comic books and was deeply rejected by Amanda. "What's all this racket?" Lorena asked, hearing their argument and seeing Amanda walking intensely, back and forth. "Lorena, can you try to talk some sense into her?" "Why, what's wrong?" Lorena asked. "Tammy here wants to play ninja with her samurai." "Don't be ridiculous. Ninja and samurai are two separate warriors, and I'm not a child anymore. I'm an adult." "You're still not an adult at 24, Tammy. You're the one who's being ridiculous," Amanda shouted. "Tammy, since when did you raise your voice to Amanda?" Lorena asked calmly. "Sorry, Onsen." "Sorry, Amanda," Tammy said, with her head bowed down. Acknowledging her sister's frustration, she stretches her patience and offers her attention. "Why don't you get your sword and show us what you can do?" "Lorena, no," Amanda exclaimed, wanting to argue. "Give her a chance to show what she's worth." Finally, getting the approval that she wanted, she took out her sword and was about to perform a kata, when Lorena interrupted. "Wait, if you intend to do a kata, you might as well do it in a proper manner." "Give me a couple of minutes, I'll get you what you need," Lorena said, leaving their presence. A few minutes later, Lorena returned with a box containing an expensive kimono. After putting on the elegant kimono, and with her sword properly locked in her sash, she began with a traditional bow at the waist, and in a blink of an eye, the sword was drawn and an attack was launched. Swinging her weapon with such precision, one might forget that her arms weren't really her own, striking wildly, triggering one assault after another of such perfection that she made her sisters tremble with admiration. Right after the traditional kata, at the end of this formal exercise, she shifted her form to a freestyle slashing and cutting stance, chopping to her side up and stamping her left foot in front of her, followed by multiple sword spinning techniques that were almost blinding. They haven't seen anything like it. She made it look very simple, as if she had been doing this for a very long time. Just when they have thought her performance was over, she puts back her sword to her magnificent tachi mount and briefly closed her eyes and meditated to inhibit any distractions, and with her thumb over the handguard, she unlocks the blade and raised her sword, arching her back, and with a deep breath, lets out a loud cry of arousing aggression. "Hey-ya!" Striking down towards a sitting 13 feet semi-trailer, she knocks it over along with everyone else. The force of Tammy's sword strike was immeasurable, causing a few cracks on the building walls, and completely disabling Lorena's computer and other equipment. Too shocked to speak, Lorena bent over to pick up her laptop, which was smashed on the concrete floor. As Marcus was assisting Samuel and Amanda on their feet, Tammy burst into tears, dropped her sword, and left their presence in dismay. Looking around at the devastation, the two sisters took a moment to compose themselves, stared at each other, and then burst out laughing, mocking their stupidity. In the coming weeks, Lorena personally handled Tammy's physical training, while Amanda assisted with her academics. Samuel and Marcus, on the other hand, gathered intelligence, monitoring Arthur Schultz's activities. The King's Blade. After being left speechless by Tammy's performance, Amanda finally got persuaded to sharpen her gifts, on the condition that Lorena never withholds anything from her ever again, which made Tammy very happy. While working on her studies at the cargo trailer with Amanda, Lorena approached them, bringing an unusual item of choice. Laying it down on the table, Tammy asked, "What's that?" What does it look like? I can see it's a Bible, but why would you want me to read it? The answer to your question is something that you need to discover. Now, be a good girl, and follow the advice of your older sister. Being in charge of Tammy's academics, Amanda felt she had the right to question Lorena about the material that she was giving, so she discreetly invited her to speak outside, but Tammy suddenly interrupted. Hey! We've talked about this. The two of you will no longer exempt me from your adult conversations, remember? Tammy said, reminding her two older sisters. Sorry Tammy, old habits, Amanda replied, turning back her attention to Lorena. I'm just worried that she might get confused with the material you're giving her. We've been going through the ancient manuscript of Sun Tzu, The Art of War. I understand your concern, but it's not up to either of us to make that decision. This is something that she has to decide on her own. I'm just feeding the information to her, Lorena replied. Seeing that her sister was still unconvinced, she went on saying, Do you still remember that ridiculous motto that we used to laugh about? She asked. Patience is a virtue, time is gold. Yes, that's the one, she said, momentarily smiling. As time passes, I have discovered that it isn't really that ridiculous. These are two conflicting ideas working together. I was the one who introduced you to this ancient manuscript, and it taught me how to take the will of my opponents to resist. That was the teaching of the art of war. Yes, and it has proven to be effective, Amanda answered. Not quite. Having been deeply engrossed in these teachings, I found myself in a very dark place, and there was a ruminate of hate inside me, and this book, right here, pulled me out of the dark. It's uncertain what these teachings will do to Tammy, so she needs to prepare for the worse. There has to be a controlled panic in moments when there is none for the order to exist. Tammy, do you remember the most important rule in your advanced watercolor workshop? You should know when to stop. Yes, that's the one. There should always be balance in your decision-making. Picking up the sword that was laying on the table, she continued saying, Imagine this emperor's blade working hand in hand with the king's blade. Isn't that a formidable force, she said, laying down the sword beside the Bible, smiling, and leaving their presence. Looking at the Bible, Tammy began flipping the cover and sees a note that says, To my dearest Lorena, it hurts my heart to see you suffer like this, my child, but hate is not the answer to your problems. For whatever reason your mother may have to leave you, God has His purpose, and we should always have faith in His judgment. This Bible is the only possession I have, and I'm giving it to you, so please give it your attention. Yours truly, Nana Ida. Passing the Storm. Thursday, November 29, 2018, deep in the eastern center of Tokyo, inside the distinctive spiral design of the Tokyo Capitol Complex, the Tent Robotics office occupies 12 floors. Secured by a series of sophisticated biometric authentication mounted at each entry, not to mention high-definition motion detection cameras and a large number of armed men, the Tokyo Capitol Complex was a fortified fortress. Working in his office, Paul Takuma suddenly encountered knocking on his door. Please come in, he answered. Dr. Ken Jung Chao entered the office in response to Paul Takuma's invitation. Doctor, please sit down, Paul Takuma said, as he made the doctor wait while finishing whatever he was doing. As he laid down his pen in front of the doctor, he looked at him as though he was gauging his well-being. So how are you doing? How's the health of your family? My family is in good health, Dr. Ken Jung answered. That's good to hear. Let's make sure that we keep it that way, right, doctor? Yes, sir, he answered in a low voice. Excellent. I sent you here because I want you to immediately oversee the production of a vaccine for the virus strains that we created 20 years ago. Do you still remember? Surprised at the instruction given, he hesitated but eventually agreed without making any argument and nodded his head in submission. How many vaccines would you like to produce? Dr. Ken Jung asked. I think that 50 million doses by the second quarter of next year are reasonable enough, given that you still need time to hire more people and make adjustments in the factory. You see, doctor, as soon as the virus comes out, all the countries would want to get their hands on the cure. And once that happens, we've got to be ready to deliver. Isn't that what we would want? The doctor replied with a single nod. Okay, doctor, I will no longer interrupt your precious time. I know that you've got a lot to do. You may go, Paul Takuma said, continuing with what he was doing. Seeing that the doctor hasn't gone away, he looks back at him and annoyingly asked, "Is there anything else I can do for you?" With regards to the family reunion we've talked about. Oh, the vacation leaves you asked for. Giving it a lot of thought, he leaned back his executive chair and sighed. Tell you what, if you can double the number of doses we've talked about, you're free to go to that reunion. That I guarantee, Paul Takuma said, again giving the doctor permission to leave. Just a few minutes after their meeting, the phone rang and Paul Takuma received an update from his men that they had just discovered the location of Lorina's mother, Bernadette M. Byatt. On the day Tammy was fighting for her life, Leto decided to call Samuel to get the serum. Unfortunately, this decision led to the discovery of Samuel's whereabouts, having been pursued by Paul Takuma's men. After being captured on the beach while covering for the Katsuyori sisters to escape, he got injected with an enhanced sodium pentothal, more popularly known as truth serum, developed at the Tent Robotics. Having his arms and feet tied up in a chair, the person sitting beside him whispered the same set of questions over and over again for 2 days. And having lost his will to resist and profoundly affected by the drug, he answered the question, "Where is Bernadette M. Byatt?" He answered, "Singapore." After the updates that Paul Takuma had received from his men, Tammy unexpectedly foresaw the premonition of her mother Bernadette, in the clutches of the Yūrei. Waking up in a sudden panic, Tammy rose from her bed, pulled out her blanket, and instantly spoke to her sisters, giving them the details of her vision, which they took very seriously. And following the news of Leto's capture and being the only person to know Bernadette's whereabouts, Samuel immediately dialed her number and received a reply. "Samuel," she answered. "Oh, thank goodness you're all right. Bernadette, we have reason to believe that the Yūrei has found your location." "I understand, what would you want me to do?" she replied. "Stay away from your apartment, wear your full hijab, and stay in a mosque. Chances are, they've ID'd you already using facial recognition on surveillance cameras, so you have to hurry up. We'll get there as soon as we can, but until then, you need to keep yourself safe. Do you understand?" "Yes, thank you." "Okay, you have to go now," Samuel ordered. "No, wait. What? Can I talk to my children?" she asked. "Bernadette, no. We don't have much time. Samuel, please, let me talk to Lorina." Grabbing the cell phone, Lorina answered, "Mama." "Lorina, is it really you?" "Yes, Mama, it's me. It's so nice to hear your voice again. And how about your 2 other sisters? Tammy and Amanda? Are they there?" Getting close to the cell phone, they both answered, "Mama, we're here," replied Amanda, while Tammy said, "I love you, Mama." Hearing their voices, she went on to say the words, "My children," before bursting into tears. At the spur of the moment, when talking to her children, there was a loud noise that sounded like someone barged on the door. "Help," she screamed, forced to confront the people attacking her. Listening to her ordeal on a loudspeaker, and being unable to do anything about it, everybody remained quiet, listening to Bernadette's defiance that slowly subsided. After a few more minutes, the struggle was finally over. There was a moment of silence, accompanied by what sounded like a heavy breath on the speaker. "Hello?" Lorina asked. "Is Samuel there?" Drawing close to the speaker, Samuel asked, "Who is this?" "Don't be ridiculous, after all the humiliation you've given me, have you forgotten? Mr. Dengwu Cho. Arthur Schultz. So, you do remember. What are you doing, and why are you abducting my wife? Not feeling too cocky, are you now? Feeling a strong sense of responsibility towards his uncle, Marcus reached out and said to the speaker, Arthur. Uncle, I beg you not to do this. Well, well. If it isn't my favorite nephew. I can see that, you strayed a bit further away from the fence. He is your uncle. Samuel asked in a low voice, unaware of their relationship. Uncle, don't do this, please. I'm going to turn myself in. I have all the information you need about the Yūrei. That's our primary goal, right? Let go of Mrs. Bernadette, please. Ha ha ha. Why are you acting so naive? My primary goal is not to gather information, rather, to eliminate everyone who knows. You're just a worthless pawn, poor child, he answered, in a threatening manner. Be at the International Standards Summit in Beijing on the 28th, if you want to have a chance to save your wife, Mr. Dengwu Cho. End of call. Illuminating in deep contemplation, Lorena sat down on the sofa, pressing to the side of her stomach. Amanda sat beside her to offer her assistance, but she must have wished for someone else's support and refused the offer. Staring at nothing, she recalls the day her husband tried to soothe her discomfort by bringing her a pint of yogurt and a handful of napkins, causing her to laugh out loud at the sight of the napkins. Lorena, are you all right? Samuel asked. I'm all right, father, she replied, turning her attention to Tammy. Tammy, you stated the intention of the Yūrei to release the new strain of virus at the International Standards Summit in Beijing, China, right? Yes, Tammy replied. And according to your vision, Mother was surrounded by 5 pillars, on the top of a steep hill, with a river flowing down its foothills. Yes, that's true. Was the river flowing down a spiral path? Yes. How did you know? Tammy asked, bewildered. The Tokyo Capital complex of Tent Robotics has a spiral shape that implies flowing water in your vision, while the 5 pillars refer to the Book of 5 Rings. They're trying to lure us away from Japan, Amanda whispered. Yes, and I suspect that they intend to use Father to be the carrier of the virus. It's clearly a trap, Lorena answered. So what's your plan? Samuel asked. We need to act quickly to rescue our mother. But first, I need you to get back on that chair so we can finish your facial prosthetic, Lorena replied. The Kirin. Choosing to sleep in an inflatable camping tent, inside a dry storage container, Lorena tucked Tammy into her sleeping bag when she unexpectedly asked, Am I going to be a monster, Onsen? Unprepared and astonished by her sister's question, she answered, How can you think of such a horrible thing? That will never happen. You can't deny the fact that I have a Yūrei replica inside me, waiting to be unleashed. You're confusing yourself for something less than what you really are. And what would that be? Smiling before giving a concrete answer, she said, You know, I acquired that sword as a gift from a very close friend before he died, protecting his family. The Kirin is the emissary of their ancestor, protector of all living things, including insects. A mythical beast that rarely sets its foot on the ground so as not to trample on the grass and other creeping creatures. Reflecting on what her sister had just said, Tammy's thoughts began to wander, thinking about the magnificent Kirin and thought of herself as their protector. And how about Amanda? What about her? She's probably Kodama. A tree spirit? Lorena asked. Yes. Every superhero needs a sidekick, she answered, jokingly. Ha ha ha. You really are a bully, aren't you? Why the Kodama? It's perfect to keep her in one place, and it also reminds me of the board game we used to play with Papa. You still miss him, don't you? Yes, deeply. With her chin jutting and her lips pouting, she said, I want to be a Hyakume instead. Tammy answered. Isn't that the creature with 100 eyes? Yes, that would be the one. Why would you want to be such an awful creature? Well, that way, I would know if Amanda is stealing cookies from my jar. Ha ha ha. Why do you bully Amanda so much? She's so nice to you. I'm not bullying Amanda. That's just my way of telling her how much I love her, and she knows that, she replied. Onsen. I want to be the one to rescue our mother, Tammy said, continuing after a few minutes of silence. I'm sure you will, Tammy. I'm sure you will, she answered. The Kirin is a chimeric beast that resembles a deer with a scale-like dragon covering its body. It has a tail like an ox and a flowing mane, with its body and mane covered in a shining, holy fire, and its face is a picture of complete serenity. Considered to be a holy creature, it is the bringer of peace and often is a good omen, breathing holy fire from its mouth, spreading great luck and fortune. It's the symbol of purity and goodness and never eats the flesh of other creatures, and values any living thing, including insects. It can walk on water and grass without bending its blades. The Kirin is loved by the righteous, and it punishes the wicked. The second mother monster. Having heard the buzzer alarm coming from the gate, Lorena instructed Marcus to go out and open the gates for the semi-trailer truck. Opening the roller shutter doors, Lorena patiently waited while everyone started to grab their high-powered guns for security purposes. Assisting with the semi-truck, Marcus gave the driver directions on where to park. The driver was Esteban, accompanied by Boyet of Tanki, Talisari. After parking the truck, he hurried to open the trailer doors, released the cam bar locks while Boyet took a forklift, and began to unload the 6-foot crate, slowly setting it down on the concrete floor. As soon as the forklift had disengaged, Lorena wasted no time, forcing open the wooden box with a crowbar, and out came Tata, Leonora, Lito, Sheila and her 3 daughters. Embracing Leonora, having been the first to approach her, Lorena was staring at her best friend, Sheila, who appeared blood-stained and bruised. Instructing her children to go to their aunties and handing her baby Armalite over to Marcus, Sheila walked up to her friend and gave her a warm hug as well. Momentarily shoving Sheila to see the gunshot wounds on her shoulders, she said, "We need to get this treated," and with no apparent reason, they laughed and cried, with their tears flowing down their cheeks. Lito, on the other hand, having been severely tortured, was taken to the freight trailer clinic for proper care while the 3 children sat watching. Lorena personally attended Sheila's surgical procedure. Lying down on a stretcher bed and seeing the anesthetic syringe, Sheila looked up at her friend and said, "Give me a break. Just give me a bottle of vodka instead." "No anesthesia, are you sure?" "Yes, I'm sure," she answered. Showing a sweet smile, Lorena replied, "You're so lucky, I happen to have one lying around here." Taking the bottle of Smirnoff vodka from the customized shelves, she hands it over to her. Unscrewing the bottle cap while deeply in pain, she quickly took 1 gulp of vodka, spilling some of the liquid down her neck. "Are you ready?" Lorena asked. "No, not yet," she replied, taking 1 more gulp of the Smirnoff. Seeing the vodka has flushed its way to her throat, without warning, Lorena dug through her wounds and reached for a bullet that was deep within her shoulders, causing Sheila to scream at the top of her lungs. "Sweet Jesus!" Sheila screamed, desperately reaching for the bottle of vodka, while her hands were shaking. "Could you be a little more like a lady?" she asked. "Any gentler would have made me look like a man," Lorena replied, laughing. Inspecting the wounds of Sheila and feeling the back of her shoulders, Lorena wipes the blood off her bullet holes, picks up the surgical forceps, and signals her to get ready. As soon as she saw her nod, she reached out again with her forceps, pulling the second bullet, along with a few of her personal flesh. Sheila's screaming was louder the second time around, but she remained strong and drank a few more vodka to ease the pain. After cleaning up her wounds and injecting her with antibiotics, using a mechanical needle driver, she started to stitch her wounds and gave her time to rest on one of the cargo trailers. Lito and Sheila rested after being given medical treatment while the rest of the team sat on the sofa, growing in numbers. Discussing the situation of Bernadette, who had been abducted by Arthur Schultz, Tata went on to ask, "Can't we just call the proper authorities and report the incident?" "It's not that simple, auntie. Peter has tried numerous times to bring the Yūrei to justice, but despite having enough evidence to put them behind bars, he has been unsuccessful. Arthur Schultz, an FBI agent, is currently on the hunt for us. Right now, Yūrei has the entire Federal Bureau of Investigation working for him." "Lorena," Marcus interrupted, thinking deeply. "Yes. There is one person you can approach in all of this without fear of betrayal." "Who?" "Senior investigator Lila Skeenman. How could you be sure that she can be trusted? All I know is that she can't be bought, and she doesn't have any family that Yūrei can take advantage of. It's worth the try. I'll take that into account. Thank you very much. Perhaps as soon as Sheila May recovers from her injuries." "Speaking of Sheila May," Marcus said hesitantly. "What about her? How did she manage to rescue Leto?" "She killed them all," Lorena replied, grabbing the cigarette pack and leaving their presence to smoke outside. Seeing that Marcus was still having that mystified look on his face, Amanda took his attention and said, "You're puzzled about how a hot babe like Sheila May managed to do all that?" "Yes, I guess so," he answered. "Remember when Tammy's MRI scans were first released at the Cebu Doctors University Hospital at Osmeña Boulevard? According to Lorena, the doctor said that Tammy's amygdala wasn't showing any activities. Do you remember?" she asked. "Yes, I do remember. It wasn't the Yūrei that broke her amygdala," Amanda explained. "She's always been like that. That's why she's not afraid of going into the water, regardless of the condition, and Sheila May coincidentally shares the same condition," Amanda explained. Turning his attention to Samuel, he asked, "Is this true?" "That is correct. That's why they're both fearless," Samuel replied, pausing briefly before confronting Amanda with a startling revelation. "However, it is not true that Sheila May's condition is purely coincidental." "What do you mean?" Amanda asked, followed by an unexpected voice from behind. "Uncle." It was Sheila May, waking up from a short nap. At that very moment, Lorena had finished her cigarette, and seeing that they were all staring at each other, she asked, "What's going on?" "The both of you should sit down," Samuel said. "I have something important to say to everyone." Following what he suggested, the two ladies took their seats. Tammy and Amanda stood beside them, while the others gathered around. Samuel was about to speak when Sheila May interrupted. "Am I really your daughter, Uncle?" Sheila May asked, shocking everyone. And in a low voice, he answered, "Yes, sweetheart, you are." "Yes, yes, yes." Lorena cried loudly, jumping up and down, exploding in tears, and embracing Sheila May tightly, causing her to scream in agony because of her surgery. Sorry. I'm just so happy, it's finally official." "Yeah, I know, but please don't send me to the hospital," she said, laughing and crying. Samuel, on the other hand, was left sitting on the couch with tears in his eyes. Seeing that their father was crying, Lorena sat beside him, signaling Sheila May to sit on the other side. "Why are you crying?" Lorena asked. "I committed terrible sins against you and your sisters. But, Father, those sins have long since been forgotten. Make an effort not to dwell on the past." "No, I can't be forgiven for all of my sins. Not the sin I committed against Randy, your brother. Randy is our brother." "Yes, and I'm the one to blame for his death. I should have been there," cried Samuel, breaking down in tears and on the verge of collapsing on the floor if Lorena hadn't helped. At that point, Leonora knew her assistance was needed, sat beside him, and said, "Samuel, please pull yourself together. Randy does not want to see his father in this condition. You know, he once told me that he dreamed about the day when his father will eventually reveal himself, and now that that day has come, I know in my heart that you've made him very happy. Your crimes have all been forgiven. Release yourself from guilt. And, with tears streaming down his cheeks, he said, "Thank you for your kindness. You've never left my side in all these years." Returning his focus to Shelame. "Where are my granddaughters? Come, come. Embrace Lolo," he said, prompting the 3 children to come forward and embrace him. A few moments later, grabbing Shelame's hand, he asked, "How did you know that I'm your daughter?" Lorena had her suspicions when she first saw my 3 daughters. She stated that their eyes are unmistakably yours. Lorena interrupted the conversation to say, "I figured that since Shelame's mother is a natural-born Indian national, she may have surpassed your Oriental genes, skipped Shelame, and passed it on to her daughters. So we had a DNA test to make sure, and it came back positive." "Why had you withheld this from us?" Tammy asked. "I had to wait for father to say it in person. Patience is a virtue, remember?" "Yeah, but time is gold," Tammy responded, causing everyone to laugh. "Father, take a look at the 2 of us," Shelame said as she approached Lorena. "If I only had chinky eyes, fair complexion, and smaller boobs, we'd be mistaken for twins." "Hey! I'm a year older than you. How dare you?" Lorena yelled, eventually laughing with Shelame. Temporarily forgetting about their problems, Amanda interrupted. "Now that Shelame is a member of the Katsuyori sisters, do we have to divide Papa's inheritance into equal shares again?" "Yes, of course," Lorena replied, smiling as she looked Shelame in the eyes. The enemy of my enemy. Assistant Director Stephen Kinney was a man in his late 30s whose demeanor and attitudes were considered unquestionable by many of his colleagues. But because of his delusional obsession with restoring the system, he often finds himself on the lonely side of the fence. However, even though his friends were few, their loyalty was beyond reproach. Standing patiently at the edge of the pond, feeding a few ringneck ducks, Stephen Kinney stood patiently at the Constitution Gardens while a few children were passing by, riding their bicycles, cycling happily through the park. A few minutes later, a blonde-haired Caucasian woman wearing a double-breasted trench coat and skinny jeans approached him and offered him one of the 2 half-smoked Ben's chili bowls that she carried. She was senior investigator Lila Skeenman. "Thank you," he said, taking a large bite out of the sumptuous hot dog, while Lila also took a few bites. After a few minutes of enjoying the delicious hot dog and wiping their mouths, Stephen Kinney began by saying, "You know, Lila, these recent attacks by the Yūrei have blown out of proportion, and our failure to capture him is making me believe that there is indeed a mole in the department. The president is becoming very impatient, and he wants us to settle this as soon as possible. Stephen, I have reasons to believe that my hunch is correct about Arthur Schultz being an asset of the Yūrei. This is a strong accusation. What evidence have you brought against Arthur?" "Well, quite recently, he reported a possible bomb threat against his family. A staggering 200 kilograms of plastic explosives were found underneath the bed of his daughter. He said he received the threat from an anonymous phone call, as stated in the reports, but I assume that this is the Yūrei way of pressuring him to comply. This was accompanied by an assault by a group of mercenaries, storming the area where Deng Wucho and the Katsuyori sisters were sighted by our assets. On the same day, a group of local fishermen recovered the dead body of Shigeru Takasugi floating in the waters of Talisiri. Our assets denied any involvement in the attack, but there's just too much of a coincidence going on under the leadership of Arthur Schultz." "What's Deng Wucho's relation with the Katsuyori sisters?" "I'm not yet 100% sure of Deng Wucho's relationship with the Katsuyori sisters, but based on my investigation, the Katsuyori sisters may have once been a resident of Tanki, Talisiri, where Deng Wucho had taken refuge. It's possible that he might be their biological father." "How can you be sure that Deng Wucho isn't the Yūrei in disguise?" "He is not the Yūrei, I'm 100% sure about that, but he is indeed responsible for its existence. The purpose of the pseudocodes that he had written that led to the discovery of his betrayal, being a member of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, was to track down the Yūrei. Arthur Schultz had personally erased these findings in his report, along with other details that happened in Japan, like the abduction of their younger sister, Tammy Katsuyori, by the Tent Robotics. The Katsuyori sisters right now are currently being hunted by Paul Takuma through Arthur Schultz. Where did you get all this information? Handing him a sealed envelope that she carried, Lila continued saying, "These are incriminating documents against the Tent Robotics stating its involvement with the Yūrei and Arthur Schultz as one of their assets. These documents were mailed to my personal address from Cebu, Philippines by Lorena Katsuyori. She is seeking our help." Have you gone through all these documents? Yes, and I have made myself a copy, but these papers so far are just the tip of the iceberg, for it comes with a USB containing human experimentations at the Tent Robotics. Their evidence is solid, explaining everything about Yūrei. What does it say about the Yūrei? I would recommend that you go through all these documents on your own. Otherwise, you might not believe what I have to say. But if I may comment on what you said about having a mole in the department, that would be an understatement. Why do you say that? Because based on these documents, the Yūrei is within our midst, Lila Skeenman answered, the Ghost Protocol project that you speak much about. Looking stunned, realizing the possibility of what Lila had said, he unsealed the envelope and peeked at its contents, shuffling a few pages in her presence with a face engulfed in shock. You're claiming that Dengwu Cho created the Yūrei. That's what Dengwu Cho is saying, she replied. Reading the documents in his hands, an uneasy feeling spreads through him. No one should know about this, and we should take extra precautions in dealing with this matter. I believe Arthur Schultz must have other assets within the department. What method of communication did Lorena Katsuyori leave you with? She left me with nothing, but she agreed to meet in an undisclosed location. She said that she would be the one to contact me. Do you trust her? No, I don't, but what conceivable excuse could she have for going out into the open? She is taking the risk just as much as I am, and she's also after the Yūrei, she replied. I see, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Yes, that's right. Assuming that your hunch is correct, how would you go about meeting with Lorena? As I mentioned, she said she'd be the one to call me. I understand. Keep me posted whenever possible. Stephen, if I may ask, what do you intend to do with the Ghost Protocol project? It needs to be destroyed as soon as possible, he replied. After surveying the area, Stephen Kinney suggested that they end their conversation while also agreeing to dump their cars for the bomb squad to inspect. On their way out of the park, Stephen motioned Lila to quicken her speed while he quickly ran, reaching for his gun, and shot the homeless man who was minding his own business in the parking lot's corner. Stephen, what are you doing? Lila Skeenman yelled as he searched the man and found a semi-automatic weapon fitted with a suppressor. As I said earlier, we need to take precautions, Stephen Kinney said. That evening at his apartment, removing his glasses and rubbing his hands over his eyes, Stephen Kinney briefly laid down the document he was reading to check on his children, who were fast asleep in the next room. He was about to check on his wife when he saw her climbing the stairs with a few late-night snacks. Caught in the act, she headed to their room, but not before she deliberately loosened her robe, exposing the brand new nightie that she had recently purchased and giving him a teasing smile. You go on ahead, I still have a few things to do, he replied, smiling. Okay, but don't take too long. You've been working too hard. Okay, hon, good night. I love you, she said, before closing the doors. Going back to his desk and to the documents he was reading, he interrupted the hibernation of his laptop and typed Tent Robotics on the browser search and saw the name of Paul Takuma. Returning to the materials he was reading, Stephen Kinney reflected on Lorena Katsuyori's letter in which she explained the presence of individuals who had undergone neural enhancement. The idea would have sounded absurd if it hadn't been backed up by actual video footage of the experiments at Tent Robotics, which have resulted in the deaths of many test subjects. Their partial success was astounding, and Stephen was left speechless. The concept of people with superhuman abilities was well out of his league, but if what Lorena was saying was true, if this was indeed perfected as she said, the thought of a whole bus filled with people being blown up with a mere stare remained a concern to national security, given that the Yūrei's primary objective was to cause worldwide havoc. Interrupting the hibernation of his laptop, he typed Tent Robotics on the web search and found the name of Paul Takuma. Running a thorough background check on Paul Takuma, he reached the end of the line to the point Peter Katsuyori had announced his name as the new Chief Operating Officer, COO, of the Tent Robotics. Any other information on Paul Takuma prior to that day was non-existent with the exception of a piece of photograph of Deng Wu Cho taken 20 years ago from a surveillance with his good friend Dimitri Gerber and son Julong. Stephen Kinney suspected that the 15-year-old boy and Paul Takuma were the same person. Reflecting on his options, he picked up his cell phone lying on the desk and dialed Dino Shiatsu's number, who happened to be a facial recognition expert. "Hello," he said. "That you, Steve?" "Hi Dino, yes it's me, how are you doing today?" "Good, I'm good. What can I do for you?" "Well, I have an old photograph that I want you to look at. The person of interest is a 15-year-old boy in the picture whose features are similar to that of a person whom I'm currently investigating." "Who is this person whom you are referring to?" "His name is Paul Takuma of the Tent Robotics, and he is missing a huge chunk of history." Being in front of his computer, Dino Shiatsu searched Paul Takuma and compared it to the scanned image that Stephen Kinney had just sent. Matching the two images, he asked, "How many % is your gut feeling telling you that this is the same person?" "I'd give it an 80%. Judging by the vertical elongation of the skull, development of the jaw, and monolid." The picture he provided was undoubtedly a mirror image of his childhood. He gave the same 80% chance Stephen Kinney had in the photos. Chasing the Mother Monster. Saturday, December 8, 2018, deeply contemplating in her DC apartment with high ceilings, walnut flooring, and stone countertops, Lila Skeenman laid down on the table the copy of The Guardian newspaper with the headline that says, "What is life like in 2018, the year of the greatest hack in history?" The article detailed the crypto assets stolen by the Yūrei in 2018, which outstripped any amount stolen by any hacker in history. Lila Skeenman was about to boil some water when the doorbell rang. Walking towards her 7-inch video intercom monitor, she sees the FedEx delivery person standing in front of her porch and pressed the button to talk. "Please state your business." "I have a package for Ms. Lila Skeenman coming from the Philippines." "Wait right there, I'm coming down," she said as she took her coat and Glock 26 from her drawer. Quick on her feet, she took the elevator and ran towards the front door with her hand clutching her concealed gun while partially opening the door without releasing the door chain restrictor. Peering through the partially open door, she asked, "Can I see the FedEx commercial invoice please?" Seeing that it had the same P.O. box address as the previous package, she eventually let him in, concealing her gun, and accepted the package, climbed back upstairs, and placed it on the table. It took her about 30 minutes to decide whether or not to open as she walked back and forth, staring at the package. The phone rang, and she answered, "Hello. I'm just calling to confirm that I did, in fact, send you that package. There's no need to be paranoid. I haven't inserted anthrax in the package," Lorena replied. "Have you installed a camera here in my apartment?" "Don't be silly. You have all the cameras I need," she said, prompting Lila to stare at the surveillance camera installed in her room's upper left corner. "Now, please pay attention. You will be traveling alone on this trip. You will not be carrying a gun, there will be no sharpshooters, and you will leave Stephen Kinney out of this. Do you understand? How can I be assured of my safety? What significant importance do you have that makes you think I'm out to harm you? There will be no problem as long as you do not bring a gun. That's a good point. See you when I see you. End of call. After a few minutes of contemplation, Lila was still hesitant to open the package, but the phone call from Peter Katsuyori did help ease her nerves. So she ripped it open, only to find the city guidebook, with the title, Lonely Planet Hong Kong and Macau, with the itinerary for her one-day notice flight. Despite her reservations, she accepted the invitation, leaving all of her affairs unattended and rushing to the airport the next day. And after more than 23 hours of stressful air travel, Lila had finally arrived at the Macau International Airport. Walking on the tarmac, her mind flew elsewhere, having been booked by Lorena on such short notice. Having no second thoughts of dropping all her obligations for this trip, a good lead on the Yūrei was more important than all of the papers piled on top of her desk. Having rented a black cab at the Macau International Airport, she went directly to Hotel Lisboa, where Lorena had made a reservation. And the moment that she stepped into her room, she went straight to bed, enjoying a short nap, but not quite enough because the phone rang as soon as she fell into a deep sleep. "Hello," Lila answered. "Get your ass out of bed, I'll meet you at the ruins." "Ruins? What ruins?" "The ruins of St. Paul's." "Okay, I'll meet you there." End of call. Feeling tired of checking the city guide Lorena had sent, she just got a black cab and went straight to the site. And as soon as she got there, the black cab driver immediately pointed his finger to the facade, sitting on top of a small hill with 68 stone steps. "What's the occasion? How come there are so many people?" "No occasion. That's just how it is," the taxi driver answered. "Okay, but what's on top of the facade?" "Nothing." "So why are those people climbing the steps?" "I'm not sure. I never asked, but if you don't want to climb the stone stairs, there's a ramp on the side." Experiencing the worst jet lag ever, before this trip, she had just traveled through India, attending a conference where she was one of the speakers, and she still hasn't recovered from that trip, and the mere sight of the stone steps made her want to drop dead. "Why does it have to be at the top?" she asked, whispering and pushing the cab door with her foot, and started to walk towards the facade. As soon as she arrived at the top, she waited and waited until an hour had passed, and there was still no sign of Lorena, so she waited for another hour. And just when she thought she wasn't going to turn up, she saw her standing in front of her, smiling. "You made me wait for 2 hours, Lila said with an angry voice. "I'm sorry, I just wanted to make sure you came alone." "So why did you have to drag me this far?" "It had to be a common ground." "I understand. So what is this really all about? Did you follow my instructions not to carry a gun?" "Yes, I'm clean." "You can search me if you want," Lila replied, stretching her hands for inspection. "I need your help in taking down the Yūrei." "Isn't that what we're doing?" "You won't be able to do it on your own, you'll need my assistance." "How do you get your intel?" "You still haven't figured that out, seriously?" "Deng Wucho is my biological father." "So, are you going to turn yourself in?" "No, I'm sorry, I can't do that." "How do you expect us to collaborate then?" "Tell me, Lila, do you read the Bible?" "Yes, I'm a Christian Baptist." "A pistol holstering Christian, wow." "Okay, if that's the case, you must be familiar with what's written in the context of Mark 5:9. "No, I don't think I'm familiar with that verse." "Remember when Jesus traveled to the region of the Gerasenes and met a man who lived in tombs? He asked, 'What is thy name?' He answered, saying, 'My name is Legion, for we are many.' A legion is about 5,000 soldiers in the Roman army. Now, imagine having the same number of troops, each possessing the same strength as the Yūrei, with a little help from the whole brain emulation. Other than that, he is also planning to sweep the new millennium with a virus strain that will cause a global pandemic. I'm sure you've already read the documents that I've sent you of the tent robotics, Lorena answered. Let's just say that for a brief moment, I believed you. What makes you think that we need your help? Because you're going to need at least one of those troops. Seriously? You dragged me all the way here in Macau just to say that. What if I give you the greatest hacker in history? Lorena replied. Seemingly mystified by the words of Lorena, she asked. You're referring to the Yūrei? No, I'm talking about myself, and I'll willingly give you half of the stolen money as collateral. Lorena's admission astounded Lila Scheinman, and she couldn't find any reason not to believe her, which led to an unexpected complication. Are you claiming responsibility for all hacking incidents in 2018? Only for the $750 of 456 billion worth of cryptocurrency stolen, the rest is that of the Yūrei. In terms of monetary value, having a bigger slice makes me a better hacker, correct? And you're willing to return the money, Anne? At that moment, she wasn't sure if it was the abrupt change in her tone of voice, the way she left her words hanging, or her sidelong glance that made her fists tighten. She wasn't sure of any of that. All she knew was that she'd made a mistake in trusting Lila. In an attempt to flee her presence, an unexpected group of agents dressed in tourist clothes emerged from the crowd, tackling and handcuffing her as they held her to the ground. Still restricting her arrest, Lila walked towards her and sighed. Your resistance is pointless, she replied, while Lorena kept her silence. Take her to my car, she ordered, dragging Lorena to the crowded street of San Malo with the Policia Judiciaria as their escort. Where are you taking me? Lorena asked. We reached an agreement with the Chinese government, and you are now in our custody. Your admission makes you an international criminal, and there is nothing I can do to help you, Lila replied, receiving an angry stare from Lorena. After Lorena was cuffed behind her back and belted into the back seat, Lila told his agent that she would be driving and asked him to take a hitch on the other vehicle. Lila drove to the airport while being escorted by the police on both front and back. Why have you come? Lila asked. Why have you betrayed me? That was not my intention. And yet, you're selling me to the feds. I had no choice, your admission was unprecedented. How do you expect me to justify that? People are going to die. The Yūrei is developing the ultimate virus strains that will spread across the world and cause a global pandemic. And you just had to sell me to the feds. Lorena yelled, leaning forward. Did you really steal that much cash? Lila asked, hesitating for a moment before reaching into her pocket and handing Lorena the keys to her handcuffs. Somewhat confused, Lorena hesitated. Take it. We don't have much time. Are you a good markswoman? I'm a sharpshooter, Lorena replied, unfastening her cuffs. Grabbing her pistol from her ankle holster and inspecting the bullets, Lila once again turned to Lorena. Do you know which part of the body is the least lethal for a gunshot? She asked, handing her the pistol. I'd aim for the upper region of your hip joint. Staring at her rearview mirror, she signaled Lorena to go for it, but Lorena had other plans. No. Not before we reach the bridge, ready yourself, she said. And, as discussed, Lorena fired her gun as soon as they arrived at the bridge, with only one out of the 3 bullets penetrating Lila's upper hip joints, causing her to lose control of the steering wheel and collide with the mobile car in front of them. Quick on her feet, Lorena immediately kicked the rear passenger door and jumped into the bridge, leaving Lila knocked unconscious. In response to her escape, the Policia Judiciaria immediately organized a massive manhunt to apprehend her alive, but their efforts would ultimately fail. Despite suffering significant blood loss, Lila Scheinman's alibi was a complete success. Lorena had kept her word about being a good markswoman. 2 hours later, aided by an underwater scooter outfitted with a regulator and scuba tank, Lorena emerged from the waters of Avenida do Oceano Bay, 650 meters away from the bridge. Ripping the airtight silver foil zipper bag and pulling out her dry clothes, which she wore in public. She then sprinted to the waiting car. Her point of contact was Colin Xiao, a mainland Chinese smuggler who owes her a debt of gratitude. Getting inside the car, Lorena notices a conspicuous glance from Colin, prompting her to cover herself with her exposed button-down polo shirt, saying, "Excuse me." "Oh, no. I wasn't checking you out. I'm just surprised you didn't get yourself bullet holes this time." "Oh, okay, yeah, I was lucky." "Your stuff is in the back," Colin said, pointing to the black duffel bag on the back seat. Grabbing it real quick, Lorena starts to inspect its content. "The shipping manifest for your heavy lift drone and EMP, as well as your other personal documents, is in the brown envelope." "Thank you very much, Colin, I owe you a great deal. Will there be anything else I can do?" "No, you've done enough," she said, pulling a stack of cash from her bag and handing it to Colin. "Lorena, no. Take it, or I'll break your neck," she yelled, shoving the money in his face, before bursting into laughter. Finally agreeing to accept the offer, he took the money and stowed it underneath the driver's seat before turning back to Lorena, saying, "I heard what happened to Shigeru. I'm deeply sorry for your loss." At that moment, Lorena was unable to control her emotions anymore, causing her tears to stream down her cheeks as she nodded her head and spoke in a soft voice. "It's all right. He put up a good fight." After just a few seconds, Lorena brushed her tears away and asked, "So how was your mission?" "It was a complete success, no trouble whatsoever," Colin Xiao replied. During the same time Lorena showed up at the ruins of St. Paul's, Colin Xiao was stealing a top-secret 1.4 megaton electromagnetic bomb, EMP, from a Chinese government warehouse in Macau. Lorena's admission to her crime was the diversion Colin needed to pull off his heist. This is the reason why Lorena kept Lila Scheinman waiting for 2 hours, because it was the right time for Colin to execute the job. The next generation monster. Stephen Kinney slows down his pace after sprinting on the treadmill for 60 seconds for his power workout, breathing heavily before coming to a complete stop. Picking up his towel hanging on the treadmill bars, he went straight to the fridge and opened a bottle of mineral water before his phone rang. Searching for his cell phone, he yelled, "Honey, have you seen my phone? I'm busy here in the kitchen marinating the steak. I can hear the ringing, just follow the sound," she said, yelling back to Stephen. After a brief search, he eventually finds it on the sofa, in between 2 seat cushions. "Hello. Stephen, it's Dino." "Hi, what can I do for you?" "This is in reference to our previous conversation about the photo you sent me." "Okay, I'm listening." "I don't mean to be nosy, but is there any high-level security risk associated with the image that you sent?" "Why are you asking?" "I'm asking because my host-based intrusion detection system identified an attack shortly after our conversation. I don't want to sound panicky, but breaking into my system is far-fetching, you know that. What happened to your network as a result of the intrusion?" "That's the bizarre part, it went through all of that trouble just to delete the picture you sent. However, I believe the hacker may have underestimated the capability of my security system because I was able to obtain an IP address." "You managed to trace its location?" "Yes, to an elderly home in Portland, Oregon, and since I've already poked around your business, I figured I'd do a little more digging to find out what all the fuss is about, and guess what I found? The Silver Star Elderly Palace is home to 7 of the world's oldest people, the eldest being 127. "Stephen, what exactly are you after?" asked Dino Shiatsu, sounding bewildered. "I'm not sure either, but can you do me a favor? Get your family out of the house for a few weeks while I sort things out. I'll get someone to fetch you." "I understand, I'll do as you say." "Thank you, Dino, you've been most helpful." "You're welcome, Stephen. Please be careful." End of call. Stephen Kinney removed his glasses, wiped its rim with his shirt while thinking, and placed them back on before heading to his computer, searching for the address of the Silver Star Elderly Palace in Portland, Oregon. Having been updated by Lila Skeenman on what transpired in Macau, he felt convinced that they were getting close to the truth, and this lead might be the key to everything. Not wanting to waste time, Stephen Kinney booked the first available flight, which happened to be that evening. And after 7 hours and 11 minutes, he landed at Portland International Airport, dressed like a backpacker, and went straight to the address. Stepping out of the taxi cab, he took a deep breath and looked around the place. The Silver Star Elderly Palace was a 2-story wooden Victorian house with a hexagon-shaped tower and a well-kept garden with a few camellia flowers and a rigid willow tree. Fortunately, Stephen Kinney had met Anthony Smith while strolling through the neighborhood searching for a place to stay and offered him the vacant room at their house, which was directly across the street from the elderly home. With a generous offer of paying twice the price in exchange for temporarily swapping rooms with their 7-year-old daughter Chloe, having a clear view of the elderly house, Chloe was more than happy to accept the room swap. But with the minor condition that Stephen not change anything in her room, having spent so much effort arranging her collections, which shone brightly everywhere. Her room had My Little Pony wall stickers on the walls, My Little Pony soft pink Roman blinds in the windows, a full pink comforter with large My Little Pony prints covering the bed, and a vast array of assorted My Little Pony merchandise that nearly filled half the room. After a few minutes of overcoming his disbelief, he drew his oversized duffel bag closer and started to unpack a few of his clothes. Knocking at the door. "Please come in," said Stephen Kinney. "Hello again," greeted the landlord's nosy 7-year-old daughter, Chloe. "Hello, how is it going? I just wanted to check on my ponies." "Your ponies?" "Yes, My Little Pony collection," she said, referring to the brightly colored toys on her shelf. "You have an impressive collection." "Thank you. So what are you doing?" "Nothing really, I'm just unpacking a few of my stuff." Looking around the room, Chloe returned her gaze, asking, "Do you like my room?" "Oh, yes, I like it very much. Your collections are beautiful, and I get to have a good view of the street. You see, I have this thing with enclosed quarters, which is why I exchanged rooms. I hope I didn't cause too much trouble." "Not at all," she said, shoving a few things off the bed and settling in beside him. Chloe was nosing around his belongings when she came across a bar of chocolates, snatched it, and asked, "Are these yours?" "Not anymore. Go ahead and take it, it's all yours." "Oh wow. Thank you, mister. These are Mrs. Olivia's favorites. I bet she'd get a real kick out of this." "You're welcome, but who is Mrs. Olivia?" "Mrs. Olivia is one of the elderly house tenants." "Oh really? But don't you think this might be bad for her?" "Chocolates?" "No, not at all. They encourage her to eat as much chocolate as she wants." "If you say so," replied Stephen, smiling. Recognizing an opportunity, he asked, "What else do you know about the elderly house?" The house was built in 1857 and is listed on the Oregon Historic Sites database as one of the original houses still standing. It recently won the Guinness World Record for housing the world's oldest individual. The elderly tenants are Mr. Lewis, Mr. Bentley, Mr. Zacharias, Mr. Julian, Mrs. Diane, Mrs. Eleanor, Mr. Abbott, Miss Emma, Mr. Robbie, Mrs. Andy, Mrs. Sarah, Mr. Donovan, and Mrs. Olivia, the oldest. Pausing a few seconds to think, she continued, "Oh, and the nurses, Zoe, Emily, Hallie, Mr. Brody, Hannah, Scarlett, Mr. Tyler, and Mr. Michael Rubin, the health care administrator." "You have a fantastic memory. I'm sure you're doing well in school," he said, receiving a nod from Chloe. "Well, keep those chocolates. I'll get some more as soon as I get to the grocery store. But for now, I would like to get some rest. If that's okay." "All right, I'll go now. Thank you again for the chocolates." "Okay," Stephen Kinney said, smiling and closing the door. A knock on the door awakened Stephen after he had been sleeping all day. "Good evening, Mr. Stephen," Chloe greeted. Good evening to you too, he replied. My mama requested that I wake you up because it is dinner time. All right, you go ahead, I'll be right down, he answered. Rushing down the stairs, wearing his full-zip North Face hoodie, he was surprised by all of the prepared dishes. The table was brimming with delectable dishes. There was spicy chicken with sesame seeds, cheese-baked ravioli and meatballs, curried rice, chicken stew, spring rolls, and Chloe's favorite, cold cuts with mayonnaise. What is the occasion? Stephen asked, pulling a chair and taking a seat at the table. There isn't one. Rachel enjoys preparing a feast whenever we have guests, Anthony replied, while Rachel smiled by his side. You know, there was a time when we had visitors all the time. Such were the days when our family lived closely together, but then, everybody began to disperse to various states. It's good to have a few visitors now and then, she replied. So, Stephen, Anthony told me you're working on a paper about Portland's historic homes, she continued. I'm helping a friend gather materials for his coffee table book. Okay, and you're interested in taking pictures of the elderly house? I'm sorry. Chloe mentioned that you've been asking a lot of questions about the Silver Star elderly. Oh, yes. That's my intention, exactly. I see. Well, if you're willing, we can put you in touch with Mr. Rubin, the healthcare administrator, tomorrow. I'm sure he'd let you take a few photos of the elderly house. That would be fantastic if it isn't too much trouble. No trouble whatsoever, replied Rachel. After dinner, Anthony invited Stephen to buy a few beers at the 7-Eleven in his 1942 Bic, and Stephen was impressed by how much repair work he had done to the truck. This is a stunningly beautiful piece of machinery. How long did it take you to restore this? Stephen inquired as they were driving. Not much, only the paint job and the windshield have been replaced because of a tree crash. The rest of the parts are all kept in good condition. I'm impressed. How far has it traveled? 65,000 miles. Are you serious? Oh yeah, I've inherited this truck from my grandfather. He made it his daily routine to inspect its condition, and he didn't drive much, while my father drove his own car. My father passed away just a few weeks before Chloe was born. Sorry to hear that. It's okay. It's been a long time. After quickly purchasing 20 packs of ice-cold Budweiser bottles from 7-Eleven, they returned to the house and sat on the front porch with their beers while Rachel put Chloe to sleep. I spoke with Chloe this afternoon, she is a bright child. Yes, she is, replied Anthony, smiling. But you know, she hasn't always been like that. What do you mean? She used to be very shy around strangers, always hiding behind someone else whenever there was a visitor, and you'd rarely hear her voice, always whispering whenever she wanted to ask a question. What prompted her to change? 3 years ago, she was diagnosed with leukemia at Providence Portland Medical Center. Less than a year later, she got cured, and she's been that way ever since. She got cured from cancer in less than a year. Stage 4 cancer, yes. But how did she get cured? Chemotherapy. She had 3 sessions of chemotherapy, but the doctors described her recovery as nothing short of miraculous, replied Anthony, smiling. Your story is fascinating. I'm astounded, but aren't you curious about what caused your daughter's sudden change? I believe it's because of her interaction with the old people at the Silver Star Elderly Palace. Mr. Rubin adores her and allows her to run around the place whenever she wants. That's nice to hear. You're probably right, Stephen Kinney replied, with a reassuring smile. Listening to Anthony's story, Stephen became temporarily disoriented in his investigation, and while he had a feeling that what was going on in the elderly house was somehow related, he couldn't believe that the Yūrei was behind it all. The next morning at 5 o'clock, Stephen Kinney went for a jog, running a few kilometers before returning home and inhaling the delicious aroma of a nutritious breakfast. Passing through the back door, He wipes his feet on the floor mat at the bottom of the stairs and opens the kitchen screen door, and sees him sitting at the kitchen table, having a cup of coffee. In that moment he stopped breathing and stared at the man, for he is unmistakably the same person in the picture. "Stephen, this is Mr. Michael Rubin of the Silver Star Elderly Palace." "Michael, this is Stephen, the person whom I've been telling you so much about," Anthony said as he entered, staring at the two. "Hello, I'm delighted to meet you. You know, because of you, Chloe has been flooding my messenger." "Oh, did she, really?" "Yes," Michael replied. At that moment Chloe came rushing from the stairs and embraced Michael. "Thank you for coming," Chloe said, receiving Michael's gentle nod. "Anthony, could I please have a few minutes alone with Stephen?" "Yes, of course," he said, grabbing Chloe's shoulders and giving them some privacy. A brief silence ensued between the two men as they looked at each other, apparently waiting for the other to speak. "Thank you, Stephen, for coming on such short notice. I'm not sure what you're talking about. Is it really your intention for me to come here?" Stephen asked. "Surely, you didn't think someone who could break into Dino Shiatsu's network could possibly leave breadcrumbs, do you? You're Dimitri Gerber." "Yes, I am he." Shocked beyond belief, he took a few moments before asking, "But, you haven't aged?" "Yes, thanks to regenerative medicine." "You're the one responsible for the long life of the tenants at Silver Star Elderly?" "Yes, that would be accurate." "What possible reason could you have for making such a generous contribution?" "It is written in Exodus that you shall not carve an image for yourself, any resemblance of something that is in heaven above, or the earth beneath, or in the water beneath the earth." For years, Mr. Stephen, these words haunted me, knowing that my sins were worse than what's written in the scriptures, for what I created is a God itself. Surely you don't believe that? But I have, and he will wipe everything off the face of the earth, and there will be nothing you can do to stop him. Why bring me here if not to stop your son? Perhaps I just got tired of my old age and wanted to chit-chat and look the enemy in the eye, he replied, his grin piercing. "Tell me how to defeat your son." "And why would I do that?" "Because you like to be challenged." "How much do you know?" he asked, laughing at his comment. "I'm aware of the whole brain emulation and what you did to your son, and most likely to yourself." "You're smarter than I thought," Dimitri responded before standing up and taking coffee cream from the kitchen shelves. When adding cream to his coffee and pouring more hot water, he smiled briefly and looked at him as if weighing the situation. "I was there when Dengwu Cho had perfected the whole brain emulation. I was the one who helped him amplify his thoughts, but he chose not to go beyond its limits. We disagreed a lot, but not nearly as much as we discussed the use of AI." "Why?" Stephen asked. "What do you mean, why? Why was he against the use of artificial intelligence?" "He claims that innocence cannot be intensified, as when an infant is born without sin in this universe. He contended that the goodness inside us is our foundation." "I'm sorry, but I'm not sure I understand. How do you intensify the lack of knowledge of a person? How do you make him even more not knowing?" "That is Dengwu Cho's belief. He believed it would only amplify a person's evil nature. And now that we're talking about it, can you agree to that belief?" "I have to admit that there is some truth to that, since the whole brain emulation is the forbidden fruit that grants infinite knowledge, but if you're expecting me to agree to that, what would that make me?" "Knowledge is not evil, Mr. Stephen. Only the person using it, right?" Stephen clarified, adding, "Your son is evil, Doctor. Please help us." "I'll have nothing to do with what you've set out to do, my friend, and my sins are beyond redemption. I can only wish you well. And the child, Chloe. When she reaches the age of maturity, you will have to deal with her once more." Tokyo Capitol Complex Incident. Friday, December 14, 2018, Shibuya, believing that a Japanese Interpol covert operation would place their mother at much greater risk. Lorena orchestrated an unwarranted rescue, following Stephen Kinney's order to discontinue the Ghost Protocol project. Stationed at the rooftop, adjacent to the Tokyo Capitol Complex building, Marcus and Amanda waited patiently for Lorena's signal. Having assembled the heavy-lift drone fitted with a 1.4 megaton electromagnetic bomb, their mission was to temporarily disable the electricity at the Shibuya district for her sisters to enter the establishment. Briefly distracted by the several passers-by at the Shibuya scramble, Marcus noticed a few couples walking hand in hand, and instinctively turned his attention to Amanda. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she asked, calmly. Smiling at the sudden remark, he replied, "I was just thinking, after all of this is over, would you go back with me to the United States and live there?" "No, sorry, I cannot." "Why not?" "I cannot leave my sisters behind." "Okay, maybe we can just visit then." "Not even." "Why not?" "I wouldn't want to get anywhere near Donald Trump," Amanda replied, causing him to burst into laughter. "That would be the best possible reason for that," he said, laughing. Staring at Amanda the second time, he began to remember a question he wanted to ask for a long time. "Can I ask you another question?" "What is it?" "Where does your sister get all these types of equipment?" "I bet you've been waiting a very long time to ask that question, haven't you?" she responded, with a piercing cynical look. "Sorry, I couldn't help myself." "Well, I can easily answer that question, but if I do, I'll have to kill you," she said, breaking the uncomfortable silence. Laughing at her boyfriend's reaction, she said, "Loosen up and stop asking questions before I whack your brains off," she answered, grabbing him by the neck and giving him a sweet kiss. A few moments later, Amanda received Lorena's signal on her beeper. "It's time," Amanda said, grabbing the remote controller and immediately deploying the heavy lift drone right on top of the communication tower. With a payload capacity of up to 130 kilograms, the heavilift rose steadily to the sky. The moment that it was in position, Amanda pressed the remote detonator button, releasing an electromagnetic shock wave, killing the electricity within the Shibuya district and causing a few irreversible damages to some electronic equipment. Meanwhile, during the detonation, wearing only wingsuits, the three sisters, Lorena, Tammy, and Shella May, had already jumped out of the parachute-free aircraft, soaring and screaming through the air like piercing bullets. No jumper could withstand this kind of perilous feat, and it was only through Tammy's psychokinetic abilities that she made it possible, taking control of her sister's arch positions and pace. Checking their altitude with her Tactics Bravo watch, Lorena led their formation as they plunged horizontally to the roof's direction, landing safely. Quick on their pace, removing their helmets, and putting on their night vision goggles, they immediately grabbed their guns, unexpectedly encountering Paul Takuma's men unleashing heavy fire. Armed with AR-15 assault rifles fitted with suppressors, the Katsuyori sisters retaliated and were fearless in their attack. On the other hand, situated on the other tower, equipped with semi-automatic sniper rifles, Marcus and Amanda made themselves useful, taking out the unsuspecting men, paving the way for Tammy to rush forward. And, like a chisel chipping through granite, she struck hard and with no mercy, leaving her sisters stunned. She was the angel of death unleashed, with no remorse or fear to show for it, shaking off the blood from her tachi sword like it was just dirt. Tammy has now come full circle. The three sisters fled down the roof hatch stairs to the lower level after clearing the roof, where they encountered a much heavier attack. Cornered on an exposed section of the penthouse lobby, unable to get back where they came from, Tammy managed to deflect a large portion of the heavy gunfire with her telekinetic abilities, but it began to overwhelm them. And in a desperate last-ditch effort, Lorena opened fire on the floor-to-ceiling glass windows behind them and led her sisters, leaping down 3 levels before landing in an infinity pool. Quick on their feet, they immediately got out of the water and rushed inside, while Chalamet was quick to ask, "You were aware that this place has an infinity pool, right?" "That wasn't there before," Lorena replied, prompting Chalamet to turn to Tammy. "She's telling the truth. That wasn't there before." Feeling slightly angry, she asked, "Does she have a broken amygdala as well?" "No, of course not," Tammy replied. Hearing that Lorena had begun engaging the enemy, they immediately joined and retaliated. Since they had lost their night vision goggles during the jump, the enemy now had the upper hand, but Tammy must have disagreed, charging the enemy with her tachi sword, striking with all her might, like the goddess of war. She rendered their bullets worthless, but they fought with honor, and seeing all the dead men, both Lorena and Chalamet felt indifferent, fearful of what her sister had become. Tammy was grabbing ammunition from the dead men when she suddenly saw a vision of their mother being dragged into a large room, with the glass facades deliberately shattered. "Onsen, they're trying to board our mother on a helicopter," she exclaimed as she led the way into a conference room where they saw their mother held at gunpoint by Paul Takuma, with Dr. Ken Jung Chao holding the attaché case containing the virus strains. While he was using Bernadette as a human shield, he fired at the sisters, but Tammy deflected the bullets with the wave of her hands. In an attempt to hoist their mother on his line, Dr. Ken Jung Chao saw an opportunity, and pulled Bernadette from his grip, prompting Paul Takuma to pull the trigger and shoot him in the chest. Seeing that the doctor had fallen to the floor, Chalamet rushed to his aid, embracing him tightly while Paul Takuma got away. Her two other sisters brutally retaliated with their firearms, but Paul Takuma deflected their bullets with an invisible shield emanating from the palm of his hands while hanging on the hoist-equipped helicopter and flying away. "He has the same powers as Tammy," Lorena thought to herself, while the doctor was fighting for his life. With a baffled reaction, Bernadette watched as Chalamet wept for the doctor, who was at that moment choking on his blood. Lorena also struggled with her emotions, but kept her distance, embracing Tammy who was screaming at the back. Watching her daughter screaming, Bernadette felt indifferent at what was happening, and it was only until Lorena stepped forward and removed the prosthetic mask off his face that she understood who the person really was. Falling down on her knees, Bernadette gently pushed Chalamet aside to embrace her husband. "Samuel, Samuel," she said, attempting to make eye contact, but his last breath had escaped him, even before he could say goodbye.